Hello again. I wanted to read you, very briefly, what one great American theologian said about the Civil War and the conflict and what it meant to a member of the Confederacy. He was a Confederate. I'll talk more about who he was in a minute. But what he said was this: the parties in the conflict are not merely abolitionists and slaveholders. They are atheists, socialists, communists, red Republicans, Jacobins on the one side, and friends of order and regulated freedom on the other. In one word, the world is the battleground, Christianity and atheism the combatants, and the progress of humanity is at stake. This is what James Henley Thornwell said about the other side in the Civil War. James Henley Thornwell was one of the great Christian thinkers of America in the pre-Civil War period. And he didn't live long into the Civil War. I believe he died about a year in, not much more than 50 years old. James Henley Thornwell is still in print, by the way. He is a very influential Presbyterian theologian, reprinted by Banner of Truth. This is one of 4 volumes reprinted of his collected works. Banner of Truth, as you know, is a very staunch conservative publishing concern out of England, and they've blessed me many times with their reprints. And these books will too bless you if you are theologically inclined, but it's an illustration of just how Christians can fall on the wrong side of history. I remember we had a series of historical lectures that we helped to organize back in around the turn of the millennium. So this would be from 1999 through about 2001. And during that period we had Professor Michael Haykin come and give quite a few lectures in Mississauga. He was living at the time in Ancaster, Ontario, near Hamilton, and teaching at 2 seminaries, I believe, during that period. He is now a professor of church history and I think spirituality at Southern Baptist Seminary down in Louisville. And Professor Haykin, when he got to the Civil War and talked about Abraham Lincoln in particular, expressed his puzzlement. I don't know exactly how he said it, but the force of it was that one of the things that Christians have to wrestle with is how Lincoln could be on the right side, and such great thinkers as this man, James Henley Thornwell, and several other famous Southern theologians such as Robert Dabney, how these men could be on the wrong side of history, yet they were. Well, Harriet Beecher Stowe, as you might know also, is very famous for changing American history in her own way by publishing a book called Uncle Tom's Cabin. She perhaps did more to prick the conscience of America than any other writer during that period, and some have even credited her with bringing on into full throttle the abolition movement during the 1850s and 60s. So it's interesting that in this book that I've shown you already, The Testimony of 19 Centuries to Jesus of Nazareth, Stowe and Thornwell are back to back in the book in their viewpoints about Jesus Christ. I can't think that's an accident. Stowe, of course, by this time was the heroine of all America because she had animated the sentiment of abolition more than any other person, perhaps, except Lincoln himself, and really got the thing going in full throttle, as I said before Lincoln even became a political force. So to have Stowe and Thornwell both talking about how they view Jesus just throws into bold relief the problem if we are Christians, namely that having a high view of Jesus does not guarantee that we will have the mind of Christ. Let me tell you what Stowe said about Jesus. This is from her works published in 1877. Christ has been and now is beloved as no other human being ever was. Others have been good men, true men, benefactors of their race, but when they died, their personality faded from the earth. Tell a Hottentot or a Zulu the story of Socrates, and it excites no very deep emotion. But for 1800 years, Hottentots, Zulus, South Sea Islanders, and savages, men, women, and children in every land, with every variety of constitutional habit, have conceived such an ardent, passionate, personal love for Jesus of Nazareth that they have been ready to face torture and death for his sake. Jesus has been the one man of whom it has been possible to say to all people of all nations, all ages and languages, whom having not seen ye love, in whom though ye now see him not, yet believing ye rejoice with joy unspeakable and full of glory. So it's pretty clear what Harriet Beecher Stowe thought of Jesus Christ. What about James Henley Thornwell from his collected works, which by the way were brought together from about 1871 to 73 after the Civil War, and he was dead. This is what Thornwell said about Jesus. These two elements, love to God and love to man, which the death of Jesus, considered as a sacrifice, expresses, constitute the essence of virtue. They are the principles into which every form of moral excellence may be ultimately resolved. The extent to which they pervade the character and regulate the life determines the moral worth of the possessor. This degree is ascertained by the severity of the trials to which they are exposed. In the sacrifice of Jesus, therefore, we are to look for the measure of the intensity of his principles. We are to study his character in the light of sufferings. We are to learn how much he loved God and how much he pitied man, from the cost of his piety and philanthropy to his own soul. Tried by this standard, he stands without a rival. So it's very plain that James Thornwell thought the cross of Jesus was the answer to man's inhumanity to man. That if the Son of God himself, and Thornwell had no doubt about the supernaturalness of Jesus, if the Son of God himself could go to the cross, then he is, as he says, he stands without a rival. No man before or since has lived and died in such a way that he exemplifies to us, to the whole human race, the ultimate in self-sacrifice. And Thornwell, of course, believes it's beyond just the example of Christ that is the significance of the cross. Many liberals believe that, but he believes his death, conservatives believe his death has sacrificial value. That is, they believe that his life was a substitute for ours, and that his death a substitute for our judgment. So Thornwell and Stowe were of the same mind when it came to who Jesus was and what his death meant and what his resurrection meant to the future of the human race, yet they had a different mind on the issue of the Civil War, which should underline for us the need for all of us who claim to be disciples of Christ to the extent possible, get the mind of Christ before we face crises such as the war which rent America. We may face just such crises now in the early part of the 21st century. Harriet Beecher Stowe and James Henley Thornwell on what 19th centuries have told us about Jesus of Nazareth.